As soon as I saw all this, I was really worried that I've been describing uh, extroverted intuition in an overly holistic manner.
Yeah.
I was like worried about that. I'm like, oh no. But fortunately, I've had enough of you in my life to be able, enough of you. I've had enough
of you in my life, Joel.
to
I've heard
know
that before.
There are other ways that it can show up.
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We are rolling along in a short series. We're in episode number 2 out of a 4-part series, talking about the analytic or holistic energies of the Jungian cognitive functions. Boy, doesn't that sound technical and hard to understand if you're uninitiated. What do we mean by that?
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, so in personality types, the Myers-Briggs system particularly, our 4-letter code, like for example, my type preference is ENFP. That's just a decoder ring to talk about the mental wiring of my mind, how I learn information, how I make decisions. It's the end of it, right? Like that's really what it shows me. And those processes I use are technically called cognitive functions, the way that I learn information, make decisions. And there's some qualitative nature to this that we're talking about on this episode in this series. And we're continuing along. Last week, we talked about the sensing cognitive functions. These are the functions preferred by SPs in the Myers-Briggs system or SJs in the Myers-Briggs system. Both extroverted sensing, we've nicknamed it sensation, or introverted sensing, we've nicknamed it memory. We unpacked those functions and talked about the analytic or holistic expression of each of those last week on the show. This week, I want to turn toward intuition, Antonia.
That's right.
Talk a little about the nuance of these cognitive functions.
Right. And I do want to piggyback on what you just said. They are the functions preferred by SP and SJ types.
Last week's were?
Yes. Extroverted sensing sensation, introverted sensing or memory, but all of us use them.
That's right.
And that's a premise of this series.
That's right.
So there is a, the reason why we're doing this series, and I just want to, if you weren't able to listen to last week's, we're going to go over a couple of things that are relevant, even though we highly recommend watching or listening to last week's episode because it gives quite a bit of context.
Yeah.
But there tends to be a one-sided definition of these Jungian functions that we pick up, particularly for functions that if you are new to type and you're just learning the car model that are not in our car, or if you are into type and you understand things a little bit more technical, what Dr. John Beebe calls our egosyntonic functions, meaning that the functions that we identify with, so the first 4, we have a tendency to, the further down a function is in our cognitive function stack, or the less quote unquote egosyntonic it is, the more we have a tendency to see it very one-sidedly. We might get examples in our life or people who are of a certain best fit type, and we associate their usage of the function with the function itself, and we can be kind of inaccurate, actually. We can get the wrong impression of a function if we only see it from one angle. And what we're talking about in this series is that each of the functions can be married to what you just mentioned, an analytic or a holistic expression. Now, these have their own characteristics and qualities that follow them, meaning that as people, we have a tendency to have a preference for either an analytic energy or expression, or a holistic energy or expression. And when we take the
in general,
in
our lives in general.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when we bring those energies and expressions and marry them to specific types, there's almost like an alchemical response that happens, and the function takes on a slightly different quality, or it's really understanding the whole breadth and territory of every function and all the different ways that it can show up. Now, when a function is one of our preferred functions, right, particularly the first 2, the driver or co-pilot in the car model, or the dominant auxiliary in more technical terms, the more likely we are to have access to both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to mention, if you're new and you're like, I'm already lost, Antonia, what are you talking about? Car models, functions, cognitive what? We understand this can be complex and deep sometimes, especially if you're new. Head over to personalityhacker.com, look up the CAR model. It's a great framework. It's a metaphor we use to explain how these cognitive functions show up for you and your personality. Everybody's personality has a little bit different way that these show up for them. Different functions show up. And that's just a great framework. We're talking about after you know how these show up for you,
right?
The qualitative nature of them. So we're not talking about the very functions themselves. We're talking about the qualitative nature of your functions and your personality.
Right.
So head over to personalityhacker.com and look at the CAR model for type. And the other thing you can also do is, I just want to mention this too, we're doing personality quests every week, which are a gathering of a tribe of like-minded people coming together live to experience the podcast, but directly afterwards, a membership program. We talk about the podcast, we unpack some learning, ask questions, discuss any things that were unclear for someone. And then we do some journal prompts and we give a challenge for that week for everyone to go try in their real life to make personality type come alive for us.
Right.
So it's visceral, it's real. It's not just theory. So if you're confused, those are 2 access points to get a little further into this without having to feel so overwhelmed with the material.
Right.
Now, if you're a little more advanced, you can hang with us here. And we're going to go deep into these intuitive functions in just a moment, as we explained more, Antonia, in the general sense. But I want to give those reference points for people that might be new.
Yeah, thank you. We want to make sure that type is accessible to all. So it doesn't matter where you come in your process.
Yep.
We want to make sure that it can come alive for you. So that said,
so you were talking about in the general, we have more of an assertive or analytic view of the world in our personhood, not even in our personality type. Set that aside for a second, or more of a receptive or holistic view of the world.
Right. Oh, I was talking about the more like if it's one of your preferred functions.
Yeah.
You probably can play both sides.
Yeah.
Right. Especially your first or dominant function in particular. You probably have access to both the analytic version of the function and the holistic version of the function. So if you're listening and you're like, I do both, it's like, well, yeah, that's not uncommon.
Yeah.
And so we do have a tendency to go one direction or the other, though, because of our life experiences. And the nurture part of type is usually which side was the more acceptable to your environment, which one you got the more rewards for, which one felt the more like you could get away with it. So in those terms, or maybe even which one was modeled for you in the people in your family or your life. So depending upon all of those circumstances, you probably, like most people, lean one side or the other. For some people, it's totally one-sided. It's the case for me. I tend to be very one-sidedly holistic.
Yeah.
And so if you are more one-sided, this information is really nice because it explains some of the traits that you can develop on the other side. And that is a version of one-sidedness when you only can access either the analytic or the holistic version of a function. But there's also opportunities not only for growth in your first 2 functions, but also opportunities for growth in other functions. So a part of what we've been encouraging people to do is, as you hear the description of these functions in either an analytic expression or a holistic expression, try to figure out what lessons are on the table for you on the other side, or maybe tap into the energies of the other side a little bit.
Yeah.
So that said, we should probably do a relatively quick rundown of analytic versus holistic. We did a pretty comprehensive rundown in the first podcast of this series, but we should probably do just kind of a quick compare contrast, just in case this is the first podcast that a person is listening to. And please feel free to go reference that one as well to get a deeper dive into the difference between the two.
I think one of the best ways to do it is a compare and contrast. Just go back and forth qualitatively, maybe a few keywords, key concepts in this. So holistic, if we're talking about holistic energy coming to the world, it's more open-ended, seeking input, reflecting on data without filters, attentively being patient, almost waiting for things to emerge. Where if you contrast that with more of an analytic style in the world, it's more goal-oriented, seeking a desired outcome, filtering out distractions, and focus on things like drive, clarity, and confidence. So again, this is a quality that gets applied to our mental processes. This quality can live outside of that. And people kind of embody this. I think I'm more of an assertive, analytic style person. Antonia, you would probably identify as a holistic, more receptive style person. And that's just in a general sense, not even when we get to our cognitive functions.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Are you trying to make things happen, or are you sort of waiting for things to happen?
Allowing them to emerge.
Allowing them to emerge. Exactly. And the analytic is the make things happen, and the holistic is allowing them to emerge. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple other things in there. Analytic styles tend to be more visual and visual spatial, particularly in their problem solving.
Yeah.
Holistic tend to be more auditory and more narrative focused. Analytics also are more literal thinkers, whereas holistics tend to be more figurative thinkers.
Yeah.
This is separate from functions, by the way, or type. This is just the energies of analytic and holistic. Analytic styles are more comfortable working in hierarchies and setting up leaderships.
Yeah.
Holistic tend to be more egalitarian and want to just sort of cooperate with everybody. And there's more attention to word content, facts, rules, methods, numbers, deductions, labels, specific, those kinds of specifics.
Yeah.
And then cutting out everything that is a distraction for an analytic. So analytic tends to just focus on the relevant information and is very keyed into those things and cutting all the other stuff out.
It makes so much sense to me.
Yeah.
What's up with you holistic people?
I know, right?
Like take it all into account.
Crazy.
Just distraction after distraction.
Right. And holistic thinkers tend to go the opposite direction.
Yeah.
They're keyed in on the whole thing, right? Regardless of whether or not it's considered relevant, because who knows what could be relevant, correct?
Yeah.
So Dario, in his new book that we highly recommend picking up a copy if it's not quite out yet, because we have early, we have early chapters.
We got the hookup.
We got the hookup. The book is Decode Your Personality, 64 Brain-Based Subtypes to Go Beyond Myers-Briggs. And that's a new book coming out, and we highly recommend it. Dario is a dear friend, and we realized when we read the chapter, he even gave us a nod.
Yeah.
Yeah, he talks about us in the book a little bit, which is fun. So he gives the illustration of a person watching a play. An analytic person would probably be more tuned into whoever's like the main character or what is going on stage and the relevant actions. Whereas a holistic might be paying attention to what's going on stage, but also what's going on off stage and what's going on around them. Like the holistic is taking in the much bigger territory, but maybe not keyed into things that should be keyed into. Yeah. Whereas an analytic might be overly keyed in and not paying attention to other pieces of information.
We could also share focus as a way to understand this. Focused on a single point. Maybe you're meditating and you're looking at a single point on the wall and your eyes are just fixated on that. And you're removing all the peripheral and you're focused on that single point. Or maybe you're doing a Shambhala meditation where you're letting your eyes a little bit and you're more diffused and you're just taking a lot into the peripheral, but you're not focused on anything singular thing in your life or what you're seeing.
Yep.
So that's the energy.
Right. I think those two different styles of meditation are a great illustration of how the focus works.
Also, Dario didn't just develop this in isolation. This comes from both his work, also the work of Dr. Viktor Galenko, works with socionics in Europe, but he's also done a lot of things with subtypes. Some of the names that Dario uses for subtypes come from Viktor with permission. Also tuning into Helen Fisher's work with neurotransmitters, so dopamine, testosterone, estrogen, serotonin, these things. And then also Dario's brain imaging EEG scanning.
Right.
So he's mapping certain subtypes and certain ways that these holistic analytic energies come out in us, watching the brain scans show up. So, triangulating all this information and data is where we come up with these concepts, and you can actually see them in brain scans in people.
Yeah.
So now we're going to take the analytic and holistic in general, these energies, these flavorings, and we're going to apply them to the cognitive functions inside of our personality. It's important to know that this is not a personality type. You're not stuck with one of these energies. This is an expression of your cognitive functions. So you can express both and or one side. You can train yourself to express both sides. Much more flexibility here than maybe the hardwiring of your mind, your cognitive function level. This is more about how you perform it out.
Right.
And so I think that's also important, is there's some flexibility. And in fact, there's actually exercises and things you can do with like breath work to get into these different states. So as we apply this thinking of analytic holistic to two functions today, just keep that in mind. There's a lot of flexibility and variance inside your personality. And no matter where these functions fall for you, tune into the self and say, okay, which way does this function go for me? Does it lean more analytic? Does it lean more holistic? It'd be great information for you to know about yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not pre-wired.
Yep.
Right. Unlike cognitive functions, which we suspect are our preference for functions is pre-wired, how they're showing up in these energies, it's not pre-wired. This is probably the nurture aspect of type.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we suspect. And yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for growth woven into here. So let's talk about extroverted intuition or exploration, since we're talking about the two intuitive functions, and how are they? How does the analytic versus the holistic expression come forth? What's really convenient is that you lead with extroverted intuition or exploration as an ENFP.
That's right.
And you have a preference, as you've said many times, for the analytic version. I also lead with extroverted intuition or exploration as an ENTP, but my preferences are holistic. So obviously, there's not a one-to-one association with whether or not a person is a feeler or a thinker.
Yeah.
And I think that's really relevant. I think this was where some mistypes come in a lot of times, is that there is an assumption that feeling types are automatically going to have a more holistic expression of intuition, and that thinking types are going to have a more analytic version. But that is not correct. That is not accurate as expressed by you and I. You're the feeler, you're the analytic, I'm the thinker, I'm the holistic. So there is a lot of, I think, variety that starts to pop up there, because you can be any combination of type and have one of these preferences go one way or the other.
But we talked about last week, if you're a type content creator and you're developing material around personality types, you're probably going to write about these in a more analytic way because there's more definition around it. There's less variance. It's less diffused. It's more pointed. And you're going to look for examples that make sense from a analytic framework. So we're probably going to look and see in most type materials, maybe even our own book we have, talking about these functions more from an analytic standpoint and not always accommodate the holistic side of things.
Or maybe it's the opposite.
Or maybe it's intuitive process. Maybe we do the opposite, like introverted intuition or something.
I as soon as I saw all this, I was really worried that I've been describing extroverted intuition in an overly holistic manner.
Yeah.
I was like worried about that. I'm like, oh no. But fortunately, I've had enough of you in my life to be able. Enough of you. I've had enough of you
in my life, Joel.
To
I've heard
know
that before.
There are other ways that it can show up. So, all right, extroverted intuition or exploration is a function itself.
Yep.
All right, so this is a function that perceives patterns in the outside world. Right? There's an expectant nature to it. It's always looking for the what ifs and the possibilities, and it's seeing how things connect. It's understanding how things are like each other. And so, since almost everything is an analogy of something else, it's this big spider web of connectivity that a person sees through pattern recognition and observing all of the different possible scenarios that could be happening. So it's not necessarily looking into the future to try to be prescient, right? It's not trying to predict the future. It's trying to see all the possibilities of the future, all the different ways that something could go.
Yeah.
And so take that energy and now apply it in an analytic way, which is goal-oriented and assertive and trying to make something happen. This is what Dario has decided to call the marketer, all right? This is possibilities that you're trying to make happen. This is, he mentions in his new book, it's like the Barnum and Bailey circus marketer.
I like to say are making happen, not just trying.
Yeah. Right. Well, and
that bears it out, right? That bears out the analytic nature of it.
Exactly. It's like it's a possibility, and it's all these possibilities, and we're not 100% sure how it's all going to pan out, but we just know it's going to be awesome, right? So you bring a bunch of people and gather them to a circus, and it's going to be a different show every night. Right? Even if you've got something planned out, even if you've got the elephants here and the clowns here and the tightrope walker here, it's still going to be a different show every single night.
It's like our quest calls.
Right.
We have the clowns and the elephants, and it's a different time experience every single week.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And you're the person who had the vision for the quest calls, right? And you're a person, I mean, most of what we do, it's because Joel had an idea, right? And he's like, okay, this is how it's going to look, right? And I've gotten so used to you telling me all of these different visions. And I would say you probably sell me at least 12 ideas a day.
Yeah.
And it's our job to figure out which one is the good one, right? Because they come to you so quickly and each one has an energy behind it.
I'm on the hunt for them. And they're not just coming to me. I'm actually actively trying to connect things in the outer world and make things match up. And I'm doing this almost in a proactive, assertive way, which is that analytic style.
Yep. And here's the other big thing is you're trying to recruit other people to get on board with you.
And I'm frustrated when they can't connect as fast as I can.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what's wrong? Why can't you see this? Why can't you connect this quickly and help me talk about it?
Yeah.
Because they're waiting. They're just wired. First of all, they may not even be exploration and extroverted intuition. But second, they may not be like you. Sometimes I'm frustrated with you that you're not going fast enough and making the connections fast enough along with me. Now you can keep up, but sometimes you want to slow the process down and be more emergent with it.
Yeah, I don't see it until it emerges.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas you, it's not even that you see it, it's that you have an inkling of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like there's a lot of visions that you've had that you actually don't know what it's going to look like on the other side. You just have this energy for heading a certain direction. And we've oftentimes described extroverted intuition or exploration as like laying the train tracks in front of the train while it's in motion. And I think that the way that you vision things in the future is very much like that. And you'll get people to be on board where they'll make life changes around it. They'll like change their life to follow a vision that you are assembling as the train is in motion. and there's no hesitancy. There was a really lovely distinction that Dario made in the recent book where he said, it's not about being dangerous, right? Extroverted sensing or sensation has a tendency, particularly the analytic version, to court danger, like physical danger. It has a lot of certainty around its ability to handle that.
It's the preferred functions of SPs.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. Whereas extroverted intuition is more capable of dealing with he says uncertainty, but it's kind of like not knowing how it's all going to pan out. Like it's the uncertainty of not knowing exactly what it's going to look like and being open to it shifting and changing and being disrupted and having to roll with the punches, but still heading that direction and having a lot of faith in oneself, right? Heading that direction. And so it has to be a marketer because it has to sell people on an idea that isn't manifested yet. Mm-hmm. It's got to convince people that this is a good thing and we'll all know it when we finally get there. Mm-hmm. And there's a carbonating effect to it. I observe you talking to people about some of your ideas and people get all carbonated and they go, yeah, let's go do it. And then you're like, whoa, I'm not making any promises. I'm just idea generating here. Yeah. Like sometimes you sell people on an idea that you're not sold on yourself and yet people catch a vision.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's absolutely what happens all the time. And I think that point of really not exactly knowing where it's going to end up, but feeling confident in moving toward it anyway, that really resonates. Like, because I don't always know where it's going to end up. And again, we're talking about me from my very specific personal expression of this.
Yes, that's true.
You know, you might be in an ENP or you might be any type tuned into this. And anytime you're in the possibility thinking, you're imaginative what if scenarios, what is this for you? Is this more of that assertive? You're kind of like, you're seeing something, an inkling of it. You just immediately start moving toward it. Like I take action for those inklings. I don't wait for them to all shape up. I just start getting into motion. And I've learned that the more I get into motion, the more clarity happens for me.
Right.
And it gets really clear as I just start to move toward it.
Right.
And so part of the assertiveness is it's a drawing toward the clarity that comes, right? I'm not sitting back and waiting for all the clarity to emerge in my mind before I take action. I start taking action even with the smallest gut level or pattern that I can kind of see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there needs to be, well, not needs to be, there is a drive behind it, right? There's there's a sense that you might not have it all figured out, but you will figure it out while in motion. Mm-hmm. And so there's not a lot of receptivity to other voices or ideas. Like there is, you love a good brainstorming session and you love it when people will throw ideas at you and help you clarify your concepts. But when it comes to taking action, it's really hard to derail you once you're, once you see something emerging, once you've got that purpose in front of you. And so there's not a lot of receptivity to what is emerging. There's a direction and we're going to head this direction and we're going to make it happen.
Well, I think there's a bulldozing nature. Mm-hmm. Once the clarity is there, it's y'all need to catch up because I can see it now that we moved toward it and I can't be patient too much longer. Everybody needs to catch up to this because I can see it real clear now and we got to get on board.
Yeah.
So from your standpoint, the
Yeah.
holistic side of this, how do you experience your extroverted intuition or exploration?
So Dario calls this a catalyst, and it is also about emerging patterns, but it's very much the word emerging is the important word. It's way more about observing possibilities as they're manifesting in front of you, right? It's not a make a possibility happen. It's seeing the possibilities around you, even if they are not relevant. It's that diffused high peripheral viewpoint.
I call it getting distracted.
Yeah. Yes, it's very
Look at all these
distractible.
possibilities. I'm like, yeah, I know, but we got to get on this one.
Exactly. It's the it's sitting there and watching two people have a conversation outside of your earshot and imagining all the different things they could be talking about.
Yeah.
It's hearing somebody start telling you what's going on for them and having it become clear as they're talking. I thought this was a really cool illustration or metaphor. Is he said it's kind of like seeing a Jenga game set up in front of you, and knowing that you can take one of the little pieces, the Jenga pieces out, and it won't collapse the structure, but that's the piece of gold, right? And then realizing it's gold. It's sort of seeing something in front of you and understanding the pattern of it enough to instinctively poke the right places and instinctively ask the right questions so that the right information comes in order to see a big pattern hit you. It's almost like patterns are hitting you in the moment as you're engaging with something.
So this is our driver function, both for you and me. And I just want to give a quick story illustration to where there was a flip switch in my life. And we can keep going down the holistic in a second, but it just came up for me.
Mm-hmm.
So we were doing just a couple weekends ago, we were doing our personality life path mentorship program. We do 8 weeks virtually where we talk all the 8 functions. We have people test into real life and all this. And then we do a 3-day live event. At the live event, we do workshop and everybody gets a piece of work, the small group that's there. It's kind of a small group workshop. And I remember working with one individual there that I had a very marketer, extrovert intuition or exploration, a very analytic. I thought based on some stuff we talked about through the weekend, we got to this person's piece of work and I had an idea of exactly where it's going to go. I think I kind of know where I'm going to direct the conversation. I'm going to steer it. I think I know what this person possibly wants. So I already came with a top-down thinking into this conversation and into the help with this person. And within probably about 10, 15 minutes, I all of a sudden realized I'm trying to push my idea of what they need in this scenario here. It's through dialogue and verbal, whatever, and it's not working. Like I'm trying to get a result. And something happened to where I kind of just backed up and I diffused my energy in the moment. And what was crazy is I immediately tuned into what was actually going on for the person. It emerged in front of me and actually got them up and we're doing some role playing and workshopping some past family stuff and all this. Like it was a very visceral experience embodied where we're doing play acting and there's, tapping into emotions that were really hard to access for them and all this stuff that I'm bringing but I didn't bring that initially. I brought my more analytic self to the table. And knowing more about type to lean into that holistic, I was able to show up for the person, not leading it, not guiding it, not trying to direct them where I want them to go, but being responsive to where they need to go. And then bringing my whole self to that and saying, okay, based on what I'm seeing, all these little pieces here, I'm going to abandon ship on what I think is needed here. I'm going to work with the energy here. And it was so much more powerful. Oh my goodness. I was able to lean into that energy. So the only reason I bring that up is to say, there's so much power in ourselves that we're not even tapping often when we're leaning one way or the other that you're basically speaking to here is we can flex and flow between these two energies.
Yeah.
If you're more of that, marketer, extrovert intuition or exploration, there's an opportunity for you to lean more into this holistic nature of it.
Yeah. Well, I think holistic extroverted intuition is how we channel, like that concept of channeling. Where I don't know what it is and I don't know if a person thinks it's a real thing. I just know that as somebody who uses holistic extroverted intuition, I'm available for channeling. And it happens at live events.
That's what happened in that experience for me. I can't even remember what happened. Like I don't have any memory of it because I was in so much the moment.
Right.
And I was so receptive once my agenda got pushed away.
That's right. Yeah. Once you're receiving the pattern, then it's like you're receiving patterns. It's like something is downloading patterns to you. And I think it takes a ability to really tap into that holistic extroverted intuition in order to be able to experience the magic.
Yeah.
Dario references Amelie. I don't know if you, the listener, has watched this movie. I highly recommend it. It's a lovely, lovely French romance where I don't know the type of the main character, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't matter what her type is. She's using holistic extroverted intuition throughout the entire movie. And that means that everything is just a little magical in her world. Like she gets to see all the magic and she receives magic. And then she does these little subtle things to set up magic for other people. And I think that's another component of the holistic version of this function, is that unlike the analytic version, which is more likely to promote one's own ideas, the holistic version is more likely to promote other people. They're more likely to be a little bit more like the thing that gets promoted isn't necessarily their idea, it's the world's idea, if that makes sense. It's like, it's sort of the pattern of what's going on around them.
Yeah.
And so there's magic everywhere. You just have to be almost like still enough or quiet enough to receive it. And so I think in our podcast, we've had people tell us multiple times that they can see your extroverted intuition, but they can't see mine. And I think it's because the holistic version tends to be like you have to sort of be tuned into it.
More discreet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quieter. It's a lot quieter. And I use more introverted thinking in the podcast than I use extroverted intuition. And in part, and here's the funny thing, and I don't know if it's our types. I don't know if it's the version of our functions that we're using. I don't know if it's our Enneagram types. I don't know what the deal is. But I love banter. I love banter. And you do not. You're not a person who's ever really picked up on banter. And I would say that the most analytic extroverted intuition I get is when I'm bantering, right? When I'm in a banter with somebody. And you and I have just never figured out banter. We just never have. It's just a thing that even though both of us are ENPs and we're fantastic in a whiteboard session, that banter thing is just, it's like a disconnect.
You think that's analytic? I would say that's more holistic, extrovert intuition, exploration, because it doesn't feel like agenda. It just feels so wasteful and right. Pointless.
Oh, see, I was trying to claim an analytic thing.
I'm like, it's just like, I mean,
no, you're right. You're totally right.
Some banter, but then it's like, you just keep riffing and it's like, where are we going with this, guys? Are we going to come back to center and get onto something?
You're right. It is a holistic.
Christian, did you do this a lot together? Our producer, art director, media, he was on the show last couple of weeks or whatever. You and he will get into this like bantery. And I'm just like, can we please get to it, guys? This is such delicious. Such a waste of time. Can we get back to this?
I know.
Well, it's not a waste of time if I know when it's going to end, but it's like, it just keeps going and just never has a point.
Because banter is its own reward, sir. It's its own reward.
I sound like an old guy. Like, these kids bantering, dang them all.
That's right. They're making potholes in the roads from their banter.
Like Homer Simpson's father. Yeah. Grandpa Simpson.
That's right. Shaking an angry fist at the sky.
About banter.
All the banter. Yeah, exactly. And so, there's see, we just did a little bit of banter there and I lit up. So I
did a good job too.
Good job. Right here. That's right. So there tends to be more introverted thinking in the podcast for me. And I also feel an obligation to articulate.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm introverted thinking second function in Dr. John Beebe's model. That's a parent function. And so it's like my job to articulate as well as I possibly can all of these concepts. So I tend to actually not be an extroverted intuition as much, except my just gut level total faith and belief in myself that the next word is going to be the right word to say.
Yeah.
Right. It's my job is to be articulate and precise. And it's my intuition's job to make sure that the words line up the way they need to line up. I just trust my intuition's ability to do that. So I'm not doing as much channeling in the podcast. I'm doing more precision articulation work, but in almost everything else, it's like holistic extroverted intuition is my bread and butter. It's just the thing that I do.
Yeah.
Much to people's chagrin, because here's the deal. Here's good and bad things that come out of all of this. The challenge with the analytic version of extroverted intuition or exploration, which is why you want to be able to have both sides, is like you said, there can be kind of a bullying aspect to it. And if the ideas aren't solid or sound, or if the user is immature and is not able to follow through, they can, they're selling farms to people that they don't have deeds to, right? Like that's when the con man stereotype comes out. Getting everybody super excited about an idea that one has no intention of manifesting is a dangerous proposition.
Oh, yeah.
And so the challenge with the analytic version is they might not be slowing down enough. They might be selling ideas and promoting ideas and getting really assertive about something that they are tossing to other people to work for them. And that can be a real problem. The character Saul Goodman in Better Call Saul is a prime example of an analytic extroverted intuition user who's kind of messed up his life around it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The challenge with a holistic version is that it can be a little lazy, right? And I think we're going to see a match on the introverted intuition side too. But the holistic version of extroverted intuition can be a little bit too passive. It can not get things done. It can sort of let life happen to them. And there can be this almost otherworldly magic thinking, right? Like the universe. I don't know how many times a day I say, the universe will handle it, right? I'm like, will it? Is the universe even really a thing beyond just a bunch of plasma and space between stars? Like
those dirty dishes, the universe will handle it.
This is handle it, right? It's like something's got my back. It's just this weird faith. Like I said, I know that every word is going to be the right word, except that it's not working right now. But the next right word, right? In the same way, I'm just like, whatever needs to happen next will happen next. Yeah. And so it's very non-directive, and that can be its own challenge. So it's really good to have both of these working in tandem with each other, particularly if it's one of your preferred functions. And if it's not a preferred function, if you're not an NP type, which side do you have a tendency to trend towards? And I would say that a lot of people are holistic extroverted intuition.
Yeah.
Right? They really struggle to sell an idea. They really struggle to market and promote themselves.
And that's anywhere in your personality, by the way.
Anywhere of the 8 functions.
Not just the NPs.
You got it.
Or the SJs. You got this kind of in there, first 4.
So being able to have both sides, I think, is really beneficial.
Okay, let's talk about introverted intuition or perspectives. Now, this is the preferred perceiving function for all NJ types, right? And SPs will have this in their ego syntonic functions, but they're going to be in either the 10-year-old or the 3-year-old position in the car model. But let's talk about the other part of intuition. So introverted intuition perspectives, analytic holistic. What does this look like?
Okay. So introverted intuition or perspectives is a function that runs simulations into the future. Mm-hmm. It shifts perspectives from different people. And its desire is to be prepared, really, is to know what's coming and to not just be prepared, but also be able to manifest something into the future.
Also, meaning making comes into this.
That's right.
Creating the meaning out of our experiences.
That's right.
It's like the meta meaning of all the things that were happening to us and what our lives mean and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually, fortunately, and I kind of patted myself on the back, patted you on the back as well, that I think we've actually done a good job of representing both sides of intuition, both the analytic and the holistic. But what we can talk about is which qualities and characteristics of this function fall on which side. So the analytic version of introverted intuition is, Dario calls it the visionary. Mm-hmm. And this is that running the simulation. It's a vision into the future. It's the function that doesn't just future pace into the future, but also tries to make it happen, right? Now, this is a little different than the extroverted intuition version. That version is seeing all the different possibilities and doesn't really have a clear idea, just has like sort of a sense, right? This is going to be a big thing. I can feel it. I know it's going to be a big deal. And all of us need to get on board to focus on this possibility, and we'll all get to see what it is when we get there. Yeah. That's more of the extroverted intuition version. The introverted intuition version is a lot more buttoned up, right? It's not just deciding a vision. It's like running a simulation of the most likely future. All right. So it does see it into, right? It's cutting things out. that are possibilities that would be disruptions. Things that could happen are not as interesting. What will happen is more interesting. And once a vision is created running these simulations, there is some variance, right? There's like, well, it could go down this way, but it could also go down this way. And all we'd have to do is maybe just do a couple different tweaks. And that's the one. That is the future simulation that I like the most. So I'm going to vision into that future that simulation, like that particular vision. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of tunnel vision that can come from this, right? Because it's an insistence on a specific future.
I think maybe a good example we could talk about is somebody that was at the founding of the country I live in, the United States of America. Whether or not this person had this function as a strength, I think that Thomas Jefferson was seeing a vision down into the future, because in the founding documents of our country, the Declaration of Independence, when the United States declared independence from England in 1776, it was the inalienable rights, and there were three of them: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He almost had this vision of the future that it's not an attainable goal of happiness. It's going to be a pursuit. And I need to write a flexibility into this document and the way we think about this in the future that gives us enough trajectory and movement, right? And even later in the United States, the history and the collective experience, this idea of manifest destiny is almost like this vision of moving west and expansion and all of these ideas. And I think that's a little bit like that introverted intuition perspectives moving forward. It's like there was a lot of metaphor, the United States being a city on the hill, as a beacon of light to the world. Whether or not that's become true, today, hundreds of years later, there was a lot of metaphor and there's a lot of imagery on like the dollar. There's like all this imagery laden with symbology.
That everybody thinks is the Illuminati.
Right. Yeah. The buildings in Washington, D.C. were mapped out and constructed to kind of create this certain image and this story, neo-colonial architecture to harken back to ancient Greece and Rome to give a sense of structure and stability to this brand new country that just started up. Like all these factors that were put in, I think there was a lot of, from the person himself of Jefferson, but a lot of the thinking that was put in, I think, was this introverted intuitive thinking to the future, building something that's going to stand the test of time. At least that was the intent behind it.
Right.
So I think that might, as I'm trying to pattern and create an example, maybe that's not a great example, but I think that's a pretty good example of kind of thinking about what's coming down the road and moving toward it in more of assertive, analytic way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic example, actually. And I might actually be doing a little bit of a disservice by talking about running all the probable simulations in such an ordered way, because I think even with the analytic version of introverted intuition or perspectives, I think it doesn't necessarily have to be that rational. Like it doesn't have to be something that was created through this really complex, like running these complex simulations and all of this rumination. Like sometimes it can just strike a person, right? With introverted intuition or perspectives, they oftentimes say that it kind of hits them, like a vision does, or something, like they just get a piece of information. And so I think, actually, I want to read something that Daria said that I think is it's a good way of sort of capturing how this can show up for a person. And I think Thomas Jefferson and his concepts of it may have been through depth and thinking and running simulations and all that, or it could have just been something that struck him at some point as like, these are the things, this is the future that I want.
Well, he was under the influence of a lot of Enlightenment writers and thinkers, right, that influenced his thought. Immanuel Kant, people like that.
Yeah. Daria says, there's a special willpower that comes with this introverted intuition, a certainty around it that's really compelling. The result is a lot of drive, which easily leads to tunnel vision. The person won't water down his or her visions. They won't let it go. And they'll recruit insights and realizations as principles to support the vision and make it happen. Meaning that more information that comes in will then be aimed at the vision that's already there. Does that track? It's like everything gets recruited to support the vision, which is why it can become tunnel vision. He says the realizations can feel and look analytical as if it's something arrived at by logic or deep contemplation. And the result is a complex idea, a concept with an analytic quality. But the tip-off is that the idea is often graphical in nature, and the path that birthed it is murky at best. It's like, where are the receipts?
Yeah.
And they might not always have them. They might not have all of the logic that led the person there. And so it really isn't deeply analytical or contemplative necessarily. It might just be a vision that struck them.
Well, and when the reality changes,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking that is so focused, tunnel vision on analytic perspectives, the reality happens and they refuse to change the perspective they've locked into.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've seen that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into detail. I've seen that in the political realm recently where there's some like literal things happening
Mm-hmm.
that everybody knows is true. But the story is this alternate reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm noticing people are like repeating it and taking any information that conflicts it, and they still somehow contort it to make sense on this narrative that they've decided.
Yeah.
And they're trying to analytically like make this narrative true no matter what the data is. We're going to reframe every piece of reality
Mm-hmm.
to fit the narrative we've decided.
Yep.
And I think that's where it goes too far, obviously.
Yeah. And I like the word recruit. They recruit information
Yeah.
to support a narrative or to support a vision of the future that they've decided will improve it.
Yeah.
And it
It's
doesn't.
probably good intent with most people.
Yeah. Well,
There's probably some bad intent in some people, but most people have good intent around it.
and that's kind of irrelevant. It's just how it works.
What's relevant to me, Antonia?
Yeah. That's right.
I care if people have good intent or not.
Intent is super important.
It's
and
the
I'm like,
most important, isn't
no,
it?
it's kind of irrelevant. It's just how the operation, it's just how it manifests.
Anyway, continue. I side noted that. Let's go back to the perspective.
That said, I think that's actually a good example of how it can go off the rails.
Yeah.
On the plus side, it means that nothing will get in the way of the vision, and especially if it's a good one. I don't. Dario uses Elon Musk as an example, and I don't think Dario is necessarily saying or indicating that Elon Musk is an NI user, like in the traditional sense, like an NJ type. He's just saying that he's probably using analytic NI or introverted intuition or perspectives, no matter where it falls in his stack.
Yeah.
In the sense that it's like everything is about this particular vision. Can we colonize Mars? Can the cars drive on Mars? Will this battery work on Mars? It's like every piece of information that comes in is like, does it work on Mars? Right? Like it's all being funneled into this vision. And so I think that is another example of how that would work, not just in narratives and political discourse, but actually in like, I want to make this happen. And I think I can almost feel the moments when your extroverted intuition visions become introverted intuition visions. Like I can almost see that switch because all of a sudden everything is now recruited for that vision.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of a handoff that happens, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the analytic version. And obviously there's some fixations that can happen there. And that's good and bad, right? Good things and bad things come from that. If it's good, it means nothing gets in their way. If it's bad, it means that they're overconfident about something they're wildly inaccurate around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's both good and bad. So that means that a holistic introverted intuition or perspectives is something that everybody should also be tapping into. So let's talk about that one. Dario calls this one the oracle. And as with all the holistic functions, it's receptive, right? So it's more allowing patterns to emerge. It's more receiving the patterns in. And this would be more the perspectiving, the sort of seeing it from a bigger picture, right? Allowing more information to come in and make the patterns more and more obvious.
Yeah. A real great example of this, Dario at our profiler training events often, or any of the events he comes to, he'll often do an evening session with some of the students where he guides them through Jung's active imagination sessions. And it involves like quieting the mind, sitting there, observing an image, listening to some drums, and then using your imagination. And active sounds like you're asserting something. So active does mean you're taking initiative, but it is a holistic activity because you're looking at this image and you're waiting for things to come to you. You're just being present to the moment, getting into an altered state, basically alternating, getting in an altered state and then allowing certain information to surface through your intuition without forcing it, allowing it to happen without forcing or pushing it. And so, yeah, the word active could throw you off, but it is a fantastic exercise. And it's one of the few times I can get into more of that holistic perspectives because he's guiding it and I'm able to just kind of rest focus on the image and allow that to surface. It's really a great process.
Yeah, and he even argues that Jung was probably using a lot of holistic introverted intuition himself. And the Red Book might be an example of what gets birthed after that.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of practices that Jung was interested in that were very holistic introverted intuition or perspectives. And in fact, his description may have been a little one-sided that direction, interestingly enough. And it's one of the reasons why I suspect that people are all over the map on Jung's type. But it doesn't matter what his personality type was. I think a lot of people think he must have had to have been INFJ preferences because he was probably using holistic introverted intuition, and there's an association with that. But there's
association to map that to a feeling process.
Exactly.
To pair it with a feeling process. Is that what you mean by that?
Yes. Like there's like holistic introverted intuition or perspectives is the INFJ flavor, and the analytic flavor is for INTJs. And that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So to describe this function a little bit more too.
I just want to say that I made a comment earlier that most functions are described from the analytic side. I would say that this one though is the probably an anomaly to that. Anytime someone's describing introverted intuition or perspectives, they're often describing the holistic nature of it.
Yeah.
Not the assertive nature of it.
And I suspect sometimes extroverted sensing or sensation too, even though we like the parkour athletic, this is extroverted sensing. I think that whole like pleasure, senses, like just taking in information with our senses tends to be more holistic description too.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of them that trend that direction.
I'll think about that one. Okay. I don't know if I agree about that one. I definitely think this perspective's one. Yes. I don't know about that one. Let me ponder that one. But I think this one definitely is described more as the holistic.
Yeah.
When you read a book or understand information, and it goes all the way back to Jung, writing it that way.
At least Isabel Briggs Myers described it in a extroverted sensing or sensation in a holistic way. She did, and then I think she encouraged other people to do so as well.
Gotcha.
Because that's probably the version she was using in her chat, as a shadow function. So, there is a tendency to describe it that way. But I agree with you. I think this is the one that people definitely do, and there might be a lot of mistyped INTJs out there who think that they're INFJs because they use this more Oracle version. But that said, let's describe it a little bit more. It's Dario calls it it's like getting into an altered state.
Okay.
A curtain state of consciousness.
That idea of active imagination. There you go.
Mm-hmm. It means being engaged with and dancing with the creative muse and the archetypal world in general. That's why he calls it the Oracle. It has kind of an otherworldly feel sometimes, particularly to people who are not using it. It's Jung called introverted intuition as an organ of imagination, and that's what the Oracle version does. It feels like an organ of imagination.
Yeah.
It's also what a lot of people who are into spiritual practices end up like. That's their version of this intuitive function. Is the Oracle version. It's sometimes related to shamanism, but it's really just kind of being tapped into the archetypal realm. That's really what it is. It's like understanding that we're all energies, and that there are certain energies that play out over and over and over. There's like patterns to energies. This is part of the perspectiving. We may have one-sidedly named introverted intuition perspectives because of its relationship to the shifting perspectives and understanding the archetypal energies of people outside of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
How does one get inside somebody else's perspective? Is by observing patterns. How does one observe patterns of somebody that they've never met? Right? They do it by understanding archetypal energies, that there are certain patterns that are timeless.
Yeah.
And there is a timelessness about this function, as opposed to the analytic version, which is very future casted, right? Is very much looking into the future and driving towards the future.
Yeah.
There's a timelessness about this function, more associated maybe even with like an extroverted intuition timelessness.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's because you're tapping into archetypes that have been here forever, and you're thinking about what they mean for you now, and then the implications of them in the future. And so it's like this whole broad timeline, whereas that analytics focused on what can I make happen in the next 10, 15, 20, 500 years, whatever.
Yep. There's also an ability to hold, he calls it multiple blurry visions at once for themselves and others.
Yeah.
And this is a function that's very tapped into like sort of how things can transform, how things can change. It's more associated with like personal development, right, than it is necessarily with like making something happen. And so that's the receptive part. The receptive part is being open to transformation and being open to how things change and alter through time and how we get closer to our archetypal energies and sort of flow through them, which I think is why it tends to be associated with like a spiritual component.
So I have a fun, completely absurd question that doesn't actually have a right answer or even an answer necessarily, but just speculative. Nostradamus.
Mhm.
If you think about him and predictions, do you think he was more, I mean, I don't know what his personality type was, but let's just assume he was using perspectives, introverted
Yeah.
intuition. Do you think that's more analytic to predict what's going to come in the future? Or was he more tapped into and kind of the archetypical energies and tuned into it? And that was predictive, or was he blending them together? And that's why he was so powerful, is because he actually was able to dip into both sides. And that's why his predictions were so refined. And we've seen some of them, I mean,
Yeah.
ostensibly come true or whatever, whatever the consensus is, but
Yeah.
maybe that's really what it is.
Or like the book of Revelation,
Yeah,
right?
John.
And Apostle John, or like all of these people who have been predictive. After reading Fourth Turning, and Fourth Turning is here, and sort of understanding generational theory, I'm
Yeah.
like, if you get tapped into the archetypal energies of the cycles of seasons and lives, I think you can do a pretty good job about predicting what's coming next. You can start making tons of predictions.
Yeah.
And they'll probably come true because you're tapped into the cycle of events and
Of how things happen.
right?
Yeah.
And how they tend to do so in a spiral and cycles, that sort of thing. So I would not be surprised if people like Neil Howe and Bill Strauss, at least one of them probably had introverted intuition or perspectives, and they probably had a really good merging of the analytic and the holistic versions as well. Yeah, maybe one is each or whatever.
We're making a case for rounding this out in your personality. If you're listening or watching along, think about yourself. No matter where these functions fall for you, there's a way to lean into the other side of the energy.
Mhm.
And I think there can be a lot of power there, because you're basically now just not walking around right-handed. You've got your left hand too, right? You've got both sides of this function accessible, the energies of it.
For sure. Well, and the other thing is, as I mentioned before, the holistic version of extroverted intuition can get a little passive, right? And sort of let life happen and assume that the universe will handle everything or whatever, or whatever the story is. God will take care of that, or the universe, or we're just having this what was the phrase that Mrs. White used in Clue? Stupidly optimistic. There might be a stupid optimism that comes with a holistic version of extroverted intuition or exploration. And there's a drawback to the holistic version of introverted intuition or perspectives as well, the oracle, which is Dario mentions that they tend to be lazy.
Yeah.
Right. They tend to be passive and lazy and not really making things happen. The other thing, and I thought this was really fascinating. By the way, he calls it a useless mystic. Right, lazy, useless mystic.
That's not very nice.
Right. Well, that's when it becomes too one-sided and they don't have access to the analytic side.
Certainly.
And not just disorganized, but mentally confused. Right. And that's what can happen to the holistic side. And he also said, moreover, the oracle version of this function is largely unwelcome. So in the modern world, individuals who would naturally go here instead easily satisfy themselves with dream analysis, tarot, and fantastical books, fairs, films, games, and so on. So they tend to entertain themselves as opposed to using this in a more proactive way. And so they become lazy users of the oracle version of introverted intuition or perspectives by just going, well, I'll just read tarot.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to bringing it to the world in a more actively shamanistic way or something to that effect.
Where in Western culture do we have room for shamans?
Good question.
I mean, clearly it's going to be in fantasy. It's going to be applied to fantasy and, gameplay and just kind of checking out and being over here to the side, because there is no place for that right now in Western culture. It's very much demonized, and it's not accepted. If you come in and you have some kind of, I'm imagining anybody that way would be just disregarded in most circles, most contexts.
Yeah, which is why it's so important to make sure that one mirrors it with the other side so that they can make change happen better, right?
Yeah.
There's a vision of finding a place in society. And I know plenty of people. I mean, I actually have a friend who has INTJ preferences, who is a shaman, and he lives in San Francisco. Maybe you have to move to San Francisco. I don't know. But it's there are places and one can carve a path for themselves.
Yeah.
And so they can have a vision for their life, even if they are the oracle right? And they can marry those two versions and become something more, find their path, find the thing they're supposed to be doing, as opposed to passively going like, well, I guess I'll just do tarot and call it good. I think the other thing that argues for the balancing of these two sides is that the analytic version, the visionary version, can get they can get a little too insistent on how they're going to grow, meaning that they can have a vision for themselves of how they're going to grow. But again, they get tunnel vision, and that might not actually be the path of growth.
Yeah.
Whereas the oracle version, the receptive, holistic version, is open to transformation, is open to growth as it comes. So the merging of these two means that the more holistic favored side is open to transformation and growth in however it happens, but needs the analytic side to have the drive to do it, to make it happen for themselves. And on the other side, the analytic version that has that drive needs to have more of the holistic oracle version so that they don't get too insistent on how it all pans out and actually miss opportunities of growth, maybe even be regressive, maybe do spiritual bypasses because they're not receptive enough to alternative ways of growing. They've got too much of a tunnel vision. So when you marry these two sides together, I think that's when real transformation happens. Just like when you marry the analytic version of extroverted intuition and the holistic version of extroverted intuition, that's when you're selling the right things, right? You're marketing something that isn't just an idea that has captured you and then you've moved on. You're also being part of the process of allowing it to merge too, and then making this whole thing, like seeing the bigger picture while you're moving something forward.
I think that we're spending some time here on introverted intuition perspectives, and I think it's an important conversation.
Are you starting important conversations, Joel?
I am. Well, and I'm tuning into that. There is so much, I would argue, analytic, focal point focused, meaning making flying around in the world. I mean, you could argue it's identity stuff, but I don't think it's identity. I think it's meaning making more. Like when someone puts a bunch of like flags in their profile online for whatever political cause or whatever stance they have, no matter what it is, globally, locally, whatever. I don't think that's as much about identity in like an introverted feeling or authenticity way. I think that's more about the meaning making of my life. Like, especially because of a lot of our, modernism's broken down. It's postmodern. So I guess people go through the world saying this themselves unconsciously, although some people say it consciously. I guess I'm deciding the meaning of my life. Whether they know it or not, that's kind of what they're moving through the world with. Now they might latch onto religion or some kind of a social cause or some kind of a institution to help give them some meaning. But often people in a postmodern world are left without like already given to the meaning. And so there's a run to try for people to create the meaning and distribute it out top down and say, here's the meaning you should have in your life. This is the meaning. And if you're not in agreement with this meaning, you got to get in agreement with it or you're bad and wrong. And I see so much of this analytic, assertive, introverted, intuitive perspectives with symbols and flags and I like embodying like social groups and all these like causes and things like I'm taking the meaning on this side, you're the meaning on that side, and we're projecting onto each other things.
With very aggressive visions for a better future.
Exactly. And
whatever that means for the person.
And everybody's got a different view of what that looks like, but they're pretty certain that theirs is the one that's going to make the future better. Like everybody believes that about their vision of the future, at least better for them, right? But most people think it's going to be better for everybody. So I see this as kind of this battle ensuing in the meaning making and the I don't know, the discourse of life through all of these, it's a writ large. And I'm getting the impression it's because we have no space or room for the other part of this perspectives process. A particularly Western culture will not allow it to exist in a real, practical, visceral way. We only will allow it. I mean, sometimes sensations like this too. We only allow it in sports or athletics. We don't want people like climbing trees. It's too unsafe, or, just doing things that are physically like whatever makes sense to them. Just go the direct route. No, you got to take the sidewalk. You can't just walk across that. That's too dangerous to walk there. You might get hurt or something, right? So just like with the sensing world, we have to channel every every expression of sensing that's not like contained, we're like, oh my God, we got to contain it and put it to some kind of sport or some kind of activity that has something that captures that. So it's not just rogue, and like people get fearful of it. I think people are fearful of this more holistic perspectives.
Yeah.
They're like, what does that mean? Does that mean some will undermine the aggressive perspective I'm trying to force in the world of the narrative that I think the world, fill in the blank of whatever cause or whatever framework you have. I don't even want to name one because I don't want somebody to latch on the specifics of it. But you could take something that's a cause or a viewpoint or an economic persuasion, capitalism, socialism, communism, something like that. These are all viewpoints and perspectives of how the world should be. And it's kind of a bully, I think, in our modern space.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's trying to force me to make the meaning they want me to make.
Yeah.
And they're trying to force you listening and you, Antonia, to make the meaning they want you to make. And then there's fighting meanings and fighting conflict. And it's like, where's the shaman that's going to kind of just be present to all of it and allow the meaning to emerge rather than trying to top down force it through? And I think that's really the missing energy in our world. There's a lot of missing energies, but man, that energy is missing like crazy. Would you agree?
It's a rejection of that level of, like, I'm using the word spirituality because there is a spirit quality to it, but it's a rejection of those things. And
it's primal,
mm-hmm.
It's spiritual,
Yeah.
It's shamanistic. It's not rational necessarily.
Right.
Like in a Western mindset, A plus B equals C rational. It's got a whole different thing going on over here.
It's a whole different thing. And it reminds us that transformation isn't something we can force.
Yeah.
That's the reminder of the oracle or the holistic introverted intuition, is that transformation can't always be forced. It can't always happen according to our vision, our tunnel vision.
Or top-down vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like most transformation is bottom up, actually. It emerges, it happens over time, and we have to be sensitive to opportunities. And so I totally agree. I think society desperately needs more holistic introverted intuition. And you can see why it can get edged out easily because it tends to be lazy.
Yeah.
Right.
Or just woo-woo and weird, and people are like, what are you talking about? That doesn't fit the thing that I was taught in school.
And I don't mean like necessarily like lazy, it can't do work. I mean like it's not. Yeah, it's like if it gets too much pressure or pushback against it, it's not going to necessarily stand its ground.
Yeah.
So we need more of that energy. And so if a person is a native user in that way, like that's the way they trend, then them having enough of the analytic version to make sure that they make a space for themselves and they have a voice and they say like, there's more here, and maybe your vision is just your vision, and maybe it doesn't need to be pushed off on everybody else. And maybe transformation happens to some extent more organically. I'm not saying that there's no place for the visionary part. No, I don't think you're saying that either.
Oh no, it's great. It's very useful.
Having a vision for a better future, I think, is part of what makes us human. And also sometimes we need to like let off the pedal a little bit.
I'm talking to you listening right now or watching. You have a more holistic perspectives, no matter where it falls in your personality. I'm talking to you to say, don't hide it.
Right.
Don't fear it. Don't think that it's not welcome. I mean, maybe it isn't welcome in the way you've brought it forward, but the world welcomes it. The world needs it. It's been here. That energy's been here since ancient of days. Like it is an old energy. And in fact, it's something that I think our modern world just completely misses. And we're so digital. This is also very analog too. It's like present to the energies around us. It's hard to kind of replicate it digitally. And so I think even as we move digitally, we're missing more and more of this in our world. And it doesn't have to be super woo. You don't have to light candles and like chant stuff and throw tarot cards around and like approach every single situation like that. It's just making space for some of those kinds of unexplainable phenomena and synchronicities and wisdom that is not rational, direct line thinking. It's more perspectives. It's more opening space and being receptive to the energies at play.
Yeah, and I don't know what his type was necessarily, so I'm not asserting a specific type, but I'm pretty sure somebody like a Joseph Campbell was using the more holistic version of introverted intuition.
Sure.
When he wrote things like Hero with 1,000 Faces. Like what Joseph Campbell did is he normalized and introduced to a wider culture the concept of archetypes.
Yeah.
Right? Like Jung's concept of archetypes, Joseph Campbell turned it into something that people now use in marketing.
Yeah.
Right? The hero's journey. like he made something that could really be embedded into culture. And it helps us tap into archetypal energies. Or like Jean Shanita Boleyn, when she wrote Goddesses in Every Woman and Gods in Every Man. Like those kinds of works help remind us that there are archetypal energies that we can tap into. And we don't have to be quote unquote shamans, like you said.
Yeah.
We can just sort of understand that there are patterns that continue to cycle through. And we're both representatives of those archetypal energies, and we're also seeking them, right? And like we can take them on for ourselves, and that can be transformative. Discovering that I had more of an association with an Aphrodite energy than, say, an Artemis energy literally changed my life. It literally changed my life. It was transformative. All I had to do was read a book, right? So I think you're right. I'm with you on the soapbox.
Okay, I'll step off the soapbox now.
Okay.
It's actually trying to be encouraging to somebody that might feel a little marginalized.
Yeah.
Bringing this more type of holistic energy out.
Yep.
All right. So are we finished with talking about the distinctions here?
Yeah.
Are we ready to wrap up the episode?
Yep.
Okay. So as you're listening along, watching along, tune into yourself. Again, if you're an NJ or an NP, you're going to use either extroverted intuition or exploration, or introverted intuition or perspectives as a strength, way to perceive the world. But every single personality type uses these two functions. It's just a matter of where, how much, and which energy. If you kind of tune into this part of you, are you more analytic or are you more holistic using that function?
Mm-hmm.
Like which way would you say that you tip in your life?
Yeah.
So come over and make your voice heard. Let us know underneath this podcast what's coming up for you. You can ask a question, share a comment, or more importantly, share your story, which is a compressed experience in your life. Maybe you have a great story that would showcase analytic or holistic, kind of like I've been sharing some of my stories and Tonia's been sharing some of her stories on some of the things and the ways these show up for us. We'd love to see how these show up for you. And come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard.
If you enjoyed the podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. You might be watching us on YouTube right now. You can also subscribe, and ring the bell for future episodes. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can grab a copy of that at Amazon or on Good. And you can also leave a review for us on Goodreads. And we'd like to cordially welcome you to our personality quests. They are times when we get together every week. At this time, the time of this recording, it's on Sundays, where a premiere of this podcast, which we might be watching right now, the premiere, which is very meta, but a premiere of the podcast happens, and then we get together, we have a conversation around it. We talk about its practical application in our lives. We do journal prompts. We do breakout rooms so that people in the community can talk to each other and connect with like minds that share values and interests being type and values being personal development and growth. These personality quests, and then we assign an exercise for the week to make type come alive in your life. So we highly recommend that you go check it out. It's a fabulous program that we've launched recently. You can be a part of the membership, and we think that it really has the power to be transformative. Okay,
so that was the holistic extroverted intuition style of talking about it.
Maybe go do this. Maybe
so you're like, check it out and all that. And so I'm drawing a compare and contrast.
Okay.
Here, I'll do the analytic, right? Okay, so if you've been listening along, you need to be part of our brand new, at the time of this recording, it's probably long running if you're watching this years from now, personality quests. These are amazing. We're coming together as a group of like minds, tribe of people, every single week to watch the Personality Hacker podcast together, but more importantly, connect with other people of like minds. It's a membership program unlike anything you've ever been part of.
Ooh.
Because it's in real time, it's dynamic. We meet online in a virtual format. And we go into breakout rooms. We talk to people, 3 or 4 people in a breakout room. Everybody gets to share. Everybody gets to hear and ask questions. And then we come back to a larger format with, lots of people, hopefully tens and tens of thousands of people into the future. But right now, we're building. It's brand new. Come together. We talk about the episode. We talk about some of the things that are coming up for us. We journal, and then we give you a challenge. The entire community gets a challenge for the week to go out and test in the real world. Come back next week, unpack the learning of that, and get a new challenge for the other week for continuing going on. So this is a fun, dynamic, real-time membership that you can be a part of. Head over to personalityhacker.com/quest, find out more, and sign up now, because once you be part of this, it's going to be exciting and dynamic, and you're going to love it.
Thank you for showing me how it's done.
No, I was just saying like that's, and I actually amped that up even more than I would normally do.
No, I'm serious. Thank you for showing me how it's done because I'm trying to build my analytic extroverted intuition more. So I appreciate it.
But I think that's a good example of those two exploration processes and kind of how we approach them. I just thought I would use this example to showcase it as well.
Again, very meta. Thanks for doing so.
So you are now invited to go over to personality.com and leave a comment, ask a question, or if we're going to have that quest, it's happening right after this ends in just a few minutes. So we'll be talking with you in just a few minutes if you're part of that. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you either on the quest next or on the Personality Hacker podcast.